Hello, I'm Michelle Morgan Nelson of the Shared Value Initiative. We are an open online community of over 3,000 shared value leaders who are finding business value in solving the world's social problems. This month, we've been interviewing leaders in our community who are driving both business and social value in their organizations. Today, we're speaking with Sam Moore of Bendigo Bank, based in Australia, which is finding the business opportunities and revitalizing local economies. They do this with an innovative partnership model they call community banking, which Sam will discuss in detail today with us. Sam, thanks for taking the time to speak with us today.
Thanks very much, Michelle. And we're really happy to be contributing to the Shared Value Initiative.
Excellent. So to start off, can you tell us more about your bank and your role there, and a little bit about the history of the bank and what you do day to day?
Sure. Bendigo and Adelaide Bank is a public company. We're a listed bank and we have a market capitalisation of $5 billion. Our origins date back about 150 years, and today we have 6,500 employees. We serve 1.5 million customers, and we do that in more than 500 communities around Australia. My role is running the Community Bank International Development Area, and that's responsible for exploring opportunities overseas for the bank's unique shared value community bank business model.
Excellent. Well, it sounds like a very exciting role. So let's talk a little bit about how your work specifically intersects with shared value. How did the shared value approach come about at Bendigo Adelaide?
Yeah, well, the shared value business model that we run is a deal between the bank and local communities to share the value of their banking with them, both for business purposes and community building purposes. So if I take you back to 1998 in Australia, and the then managing director of the bank, Rob Hunt, he was managing a small state-based bank in Australia. And there were a lot of challenges, and he was wondering what the future held for the bank back then in 1998. The challenges in the community were as a result of a wave of bank branch closures throughout Australia. In the 10 years prior, there was something like 30% of bank branches had closed, and about half of that had been in country towns. Some of those towns had had 4 or 5 bank branches, and they'd gone to a part-time service or even none. And the communities were really wondering how this happened. But there was a significant amount of change throughout Australia in that period. There was technological advances, so in terms of farm machinery and transportation, so farms were consolidating. Then there was the centralisation of government services and also private services, so they were leaving those country towns. And then there was also significant deregulation of the banking industry in Australia. So what that meant was that margins were compressed for banks. And previously, where some of those bank branches were probably cross-subsidised with other products and services that the banks offered, the banks weren't able to do that anymore. But it was very unfortunate because it left those local communities in economic decline and feeling disempowered. And because the bank was active in those communities, it was also facing challenges. As a small retail bank in an industry that traditionally favours economies of scale, it had a real conundrum on its hand. Did it consolidate and then effectively turn its back on those communities which it was there to serve? What could it do? It knew it couldn't continue to provide subsidies to its bank branches. So it engaged and it worked with those very communities on that problem. Eventually it agreed with those communities to bear some of the responsibility in running those bank branches. So there were locals who would raise the startup capital that would go into a local company which would then fit out the branch and employ the branch staff. And the bank would provide the banking infrastructure and the banking license and the coverage of its banking authorities. So in that sense, the bank took on the responsibilities that benefited from scale, and the community would acquire and look after the customers. In other words, taking on those responsibilities that benefited from local knowledge and local connection. And then the bank and the community would share the revenues from that business. They'd have shared responsibilities, so shared revenues. And the profits that were made by that local company would then be retained. They could pay a reasonable return to their shareholders, but they'd also be obliged to reinvest back into their local community with a local enterprise or community projects, all with the purpose of community building. So you can see under that model that as the banking business grows, there's more and more value, and that's shared between the bank and the local community. And there's more available for that local community to reinvest into community development. So under that model, those communities that were declining, we could then see prospering. So it was a great idea.
That's fantastic.
And we've seen some great, thanks Michelle, we've seen some great developments. Sometimes they're hard to measure, and I know that having participated in the shared value community, it's one of the challenges that people face, measuring those outcomes beyond the financial outcomes. But it's great to talk about examples. And so I'll pick 3 to talk to you about today.
Wonderful.
One example is a remote rural community that is subject to floods of natural disaster proportions. And over the last 6 years, it's had a couple of those. The first one it really suffered in terms of the emergency evacuation. Evacuation can predominantly only be done by helicopter. And the helipad was a significant distance from this local community. So what it meant was the journeys on the helicopter were quite long, and it couldn't pick up as many people as it otherwise could have if there was a helipad in the local community. So the local community company took that on board. They investigated it, and they found that helipads were very, very expensive pieces of infrastructure to implement. But because they could unite, because they could get together, self-organise, they actually delivered themselves at a helipad at a significant saving, which was a great result. Another example is an outer urban community in Australia, which is in a highly wooded area, and it's quite hilly as well. And because of that, it's subject to quite dangerous bushfires. One piece of equipment that would significantly benefit the bush firefighters in that local community was satellite telephones. But those bushfires struggled to get approval from their National Fire Service for the purchase of those satellite phones. And there were actually people that were leaving that community because they were concerned about that issue. But the local community company was able to reinvest into just a set of satellite phones for those firefighters, which meant that they were able to stay in that community, and the community felt the uplift from that. Another example is outer urban communities that we have community banks in. This particular one was a new development, a new subdivision. But as it became populated, people there realised that it lacked facilities. Youth, sport and community activities couldn't be carried out because there just wasn't the facility for them. Everyone in the local community knew that. And with the community company, they were able to sort of unite, prioritise that as an issue for them, and then pursue it through their community company. They put forward a small amount of seed funding, and then they were able to leverage that with local, state and federal governments. And in the end, they actually delivered themselves a $10.5 million facility. And those outcomes are what's great about shared value businesses, because it's the social contribution that they make every day as part of running their business that's celebrated. And it's a really authentic way of more broadly contributing. You know, as the business grows, the contribution grows. And I overheard a great conversation, one of our executives and someone external to the bank from marketing, who wanted to know why the Bendigo Bank brand was so successful. And the response was, it's because of our deeds. And I think that's just a great accolade for shared value. And it supports what we say about the business growing and then the social contribution growing as well.
Right. It's that partnership or that synergistic cycle. And you can hear, I hear a lot of levels of shared value in their strengthening the cluster and reimagining the model. So those are really great examples, and they're very tangible, and that's exactly, what our community is looking for. So you talked about some really positive examples, which we of course want to hear. Conversely, what have been some of the challenges around community banking, or what is there a lesson you can share with the community who, a fellow practitioner who might be facing some internal challenges in getting a shared value strategy to stick? So any learnings that you can share with the community in that sense?
Yeah, there's a lot of learning that's gone on around shared value. I think the model that we run, the main one is that whereas other banks can decide where they're going to put a branch and they do their analysis around it and they make that decision within the bank, we can't do that. So we can't necessarily deliver a branch to a community. Our role is more of an enabling role. So we don't choose where to open a community bank, but we work with the community to assist them along what's now a well-trodden path for us. But it's the community that ultimately takes the initiative, identifies its leaders, self-organise, and then unites around that common purpose, being banking services and community advancement. And, the shared value business of that nature, the bank has to be comfortable with an element of divesting control and partnering with community. And that needs a deeper element of appreciation and patience as a network such as that is supported and grows. So I think that's the main takeout that I can provide you with.
Yeah, no, that's very that's a good one as companies are venturing into this new territory. So we appreciate you sharing the challenges and being candid about that as well. It's not always the easiest climb to implementing shared value. So we appreciate your insights. Well, it's been really great talking
Thanks.
with you. Yeah, do you have anything else to add? And we'd love to hear any other insights.
Yeah, I might have misled you before when I talked about the difficulty in measuring, because I do have some measurements that I can share with you. Is it okay if I
Perfect.
talk about them?
Yes, we love it.
Well, I suppose in terms of creation of social value, as I said, the community bank model has been operating since 1998, and we now have 305 community bank branches around Australia. So in terms of what individuals get out of that, individual customers, they get their banking product with local face-to-face service in a local physical branch. In terms of the community, there's a community company that, as I said, has taken the initiative, self-organised, and united around that common purpose. So that means that the community's then identified leaders, that it's got a governance structure in place, and also with the business, it's got a funding structure. That's created 1,500 jobs in those local communities. And since 1998, there's $1.3 billion of income that has gone into those communities. And of course, they've used that to pay for their expenses of running their local branches, such as paying salaries to their employees. They've also paid dividends to their local shareholders. But then the majority of their profit they've put into their local causes, which they've prioritised and they've supported. And in aggregate, since the start of the model, there's been $120 million that's gone into those local causes. And that's generally very prudently spent. Sometimes it's leveraged, but the causes are locally determined, and they're determined by those directors, those leaders in their community that are motivated by community building. And that's how we get those great outcomes like the helipads, the satellite phones, and the sports stadiums. Then in terms of, because it's not just all about social value, then in terms of creation of business value, Bendigo Bank has a leading Net Promoter Score. So some of the things that contribute to that are those 1,900 directors that I talked about of those local community banks. They're local leaders in their community. And like I said, they had to raise capital locally to start their community bank. In aggregate, That's $150 million that's been raised by those directors from 70,000 local shareholders. So they contribute to that leading Net Promoter Score. The other thing it does is it really enhances the bank's connection with its customers and its community. So if I can give you some examples of that, I've sat around a table with a farming customer, with the community bank branch manager, and we've talked about the profitability of the local community company. And it's been celebrated because that customer has understood that as that community company becomes more profitable, then it's able to reinvest more back in the community and do good things in the community. I've also been to several community bank branch openings when they first open their doors, and they're really well supported by the community. One example that I like to talk about is when staff are introduced and they're applauded, and it really does remind me of when the basketball stars run onto the basketball court and get a great applause from the crowd. It has great staffing, it creates great employee engagement as well. So one of my bankers told me once that when he worked at a previous bank, if he called 10 customers, he was lucky if one wanted to speak to him. But working at Bendigo Bank, if he calls 10, he's lucky if one doesn't want to speak to him. And it's really because there's something more to talk about than banking. So it provides us with a really sustainable business. And then really cutting to the chase and talking about the numbers, there's 1 million new customers to the bank as a result of community banking. And there's $24 billion in new banking business as a result of it as well. So I think it's a great model.
Excellent. Thank you for sharing that. And it's great to have some hard numbers and really show the growth of both sides of the business and social value. You also make some really interesting linkages to shared value and brand and the impact shared value has on consumer engagement and loyalty, as well as employee engagement, all things that we want to explore. So we might circle back with you to talk more about that as we explore those contours of shared value in the future. But it's been wonderful talking to you today. I want to thank you for joining us, and I know the Shared Value Initiative community really appreciates hearing about your work and specific examples at Bendigo Adelaide. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Michelle. As I said before, we're really enjoying participating in the Shared Value Initiative.
Well, it's wonderful to have you. Thanks for your contribution. And to the community members watching, you can read more about the community banking model at Bendigo, along with other shared value initiatives in the banking industry, in our new research compendium, Banking on Shared Value. We have a landing page with a lot of resources for that. It's research now available on sharedvalue.org. And also, if you are a practitioner based in Australia, the Shared Value Initiative has recently partnered with the Shared Value Project in Australia to have an on-the-ground presence to really lead the adoption and learning around shared value in that region. So very exciting news there, and we hope that you'll get to know the Shared Value Project as well. So if you're interested in driving shared value at your organization, please join the community at sharedvalue.org, where you can stay in touch with the initiative, new research, and connect with all shared value with other shared value practitioners like Sam. And thank you for joining us today.